This is a commercial district situated just beyond the central business area, with establishments like restaurants open and a steady flow of people on foot. A black Porsche SUV is parked directly at the curb in front of an upscale office building, its engine off and driver's door closed. Beside it stands a man, described as a black male in his early 40s, dressed in business attire consisting of a tailored navy suit, wearing sunglasses, holding a mobile phone in one hand and a key fob in the other. He is not exhibiting signs of nervousness, such as pacing or glancing around suspiciously. Rather, he appears to be waiting with a calm demeanor, exhibiting the posture of someone anticipating an appointment rather than trying to evade notice. However, across the street, a patrol cruiser slows its pace, as from the officer's vantage point, the scene is interpreted differently. A high-value vehicle, a black man, standing beside it with no immediate indication of entry, no visible valet service ticket, and the plates not yet run for verification. An assumption fills the void where factual confirmation should be. The cruiser pulls up to the curb abruptly. The door opens. The body camera lurches as the officer exits the vehicle. The officer's posture is already tense before any interaction commences. There is no initial greeting or introduction. The officer's hand rests near their holster as they approach. The man notices the officer's approach immediately, but does not react defensively, simply observing calmly, waiting. "Are you waiting for the owner?" the officer inquires. There is no preamble, no contextual setup, just an accusation framed as a question. The man slightly lowers his sunglasses. "I am the owner," he states. The officer stops walking and studies the man for a longer duration, then glances at the Porsche and then back at the man, their expression visibly tightening. "Yeah," the officer replies skeptically. "Yes," the man reiterates. The officer circles the SUV slightly, moving toward the rear. Their gaze sweeps over the plates, the trim badging, the condition of the vehicle, noting its luxury trim, and the presence of a dealer tag still affixed to the frame. The officer returns to the front, still unconvinced. "Would you mind telling me whose vehicle this is?" the officer asks again. "It is mine," the man repeats calmly. The officer exhales audibly through their nose. "Step away from the vehicle." The request is delivered swiftly and without explanation. The man blinks once. "I beg your pardon." "I said, step away from the vehicle." The man complies, taking calm, measured steps back onto the sidewalk, keeping his hands visible. He understands that escalation has already begun. "Do you have identification?" the officer asks. "Yes." "Registration?" "Yes." "Then why are you simply standing here instead of getting into the vehicle?" "I am expecting someone from the building." The officer tilts their head slightly, their suspicion deepening rather than easing. "You expect me to believe that?" the officer asks. The man pauses. "I am not sure what you are implying." The officer gestures toward the Porsche. "Because vehicles of this nature do not typically belong to individuals of your demographic." A heavy silence descends upon the sidewalk. Pedestrians slow their pace slightly. A valet attendant glances over. Mobile phones begin to be subtly lifted. "Before we proceed any further, please mention your location so we can observe the extent of this situation's reach." The man exhales slowly, without displaying any emotional reaction, merely processing the statement. "My demographic?" he repeats calmly. The officer shrugs. "You know what I mean." "No," the man replies evenly. "I do not." The officer ignores the request and moves closer to the vehicle again, peering through the tinted windows. "Keys," the officer says. The man lifts the key fob slightly. "They are right here." "Hand them over." The man does not move immediately. "Is there a particular reason?" "To ascertain that the vehicle has not been stolen." The directness of the accusation is now apparent, with no more implication. "You suspect I have stolen my own car?" the man asks calmly. "I believe individuals steal vehicles of this type on a daily basis," the officer replies. "And you have concluded that this applies to me." "You fit the profile." "What profile?" The officer gestures again. "The suit, the observation, the vehicle, this scenario." The man studies the officer quietly and then states, "I can provide you with the registration documents." "Do that," the officer replies. The man slowly reaches inside his jacket pocket. The officer's hand instantly moves closer to their weapon. Slowly. "I am moving. Slowly. Keep one hand visible." The man carefully retrieves his wallet, removes his license and registration card, and hands them over. The officer examines the documents. The name on the documents matches the license plate. The plate matches the VIN. The registration is active, the insurance is current, and the address is local. Everything checks out. However, suspicion has not entirely dissipated from the officer's posture, as bias does not simply vanish with the presentation of paperwork, it seeks new avenues. "Did you just purchase this?" the officer asks. "Yes." "With cash?" "No." "Financing?" "And from what employment?" "Executive administration." The officer raises an eyebrow. "In what capacity?" "Municipal operations." He offers no further elaboration, but the officer continues to press. "Curious," the officer mutters. "Individuals involved in municipal work typically drive sedans, not vehicles valued in the six figures." The man replies calmly. "People in municipal work hold various positions." The officer scoffs. "Indeed. And what is your position?" "A high one." The officer smirks. "Of course." The officer circles the Porsche again and runs the license plate through their radio. Dispatch confirms the same information already present on the card. The registered owner is the man standing before them. Still, the officer is not satisfied, as now pride is involved. "So, why are you parked out here instead of in the garage?" the officer asks. "Valet directed me here." The officer looks toward the valet stand. One attendant nods faintly in confirmation. Yet, the officer persists. "Do you realize how many stolen luxury vehicles we recover with forged documentation?" The man replies calmly. "I am certain you recover many. This is not one of them." The officer steps closer again, their voice lowering. "Because, to be quite candid, you do not present as someone who owns a Porsche." There it is again. Not suspicion of theft, but suspicion of ownership. The man calmly folds his hands in front of him. "And what exactly does someone who owns a Porsche look like?" The officer shrugs. "Not like you." Another silence descends. The body camera is meticulously recording every word. Pedestrians are now watching intently, as tone carries more weight than volume, and the tone has veered into profiling territory. The officer hands the registration back, but not with any degree of respect, merely to complete the procedural step while maintaining an air of suspicion. "Well," the officer says, "until I am certain that everything is in order, you are not going anywhere." "I had no intention of going anywhere," the man replies calmly. "I was awaiting a meeting." "What meeting?" "Inside the building." "With whom?" The man pauses briefly before answering. "The executive board." The officer chuckles. "Indeed. Yes. And what is your role in this?" The man looks directly at the officer now. "Assuming command." The officer frowns. "Command of what?" The man adjusts his cuffs slightly, with a calm, measured movement. "Of the department." The officer blinks once, processing the statement, not yet believing it, as the implication has not fully registered. And that misunderstanding is about to detonate the moment someone from inside that building emerges to greet him, because the man he accused of stealing the Porsche did not merely own the vehicle, he outranked the badge questioning him. The officer stands a few feet away from the Porsche SUV, their posture rigid, arms held slightly away from their sides as if physically projecting authority. Opposite him, the man remains calm and composed, still holding his phone and key fob. His voice still level, but the tension between them has shifted because the officer heard the words "assuming command," and their mind instantly rejected them. "Command of what?" the officer repeats, their tone now sharper, less curious, and more challenging. The man meets their gaze evenly. "Of the department." The officer scoffs loudly, actually laughing this time. "Yeah. All right," the officer says, shaking their head. You expect me to believe that? I am not asking you to believe anything, the man replies calmly. I am stating the reason for my presence. The officer steps closer again, invading the man's personal space. Now, individuals like yourself do not simply walk into municipal buildings discussing taking command. There it is again. The phrasing. Not doubt about a job title, but doubt about who holds it. The man exhales slowly. Run my name. Oh, I certainly will, the officer replies. Because at this moment, nothing about this situation adds up. The officer gestures toward the Porsche again, a six-figure SUV. Then toward the building, an executive meeting. Then toward the man. And you standing here as if you run the place? I do, the man replies. The officer smirks. Sure you do. Backup sirens chirp lightly behind them. Another patrol cruiser pulls up, moving slowly, not in an urgent manner, but its presence instantly alters the energy of the scene because additional officers signify additional witnesses, and more witnesses mean either stabilization or amplification of the situation. Two officers exit their vehicle and approach calmly, assessing the scene before speaking. What is happening? One of them asks. The primary officer answers quickly, taking control of the narrative. Possible stolen vehicle, the officer says, nodding toward the Porsche. The subject claims ownership. Their story does not align. The backup officer looks at the man, then at the vehicle, then back at the primary officer. Plates checked. Yes. Return registered to him. The backup officer pauses, then asks, So, what is the issue? The primary officer exhales sharply. Everything else? The officer gestures again. He claims he is here to assume command of the department. The backup officer looks at the man again, this time more carefully. The suit is tailored, the shoes are polished, the watch is expensive but professional, not ostentatious. He exhibits an executive presence, not the nervousness of a criminal. Sir, the backup officer says calmly, what is your name? The man answers without hesitation. Commissioner Desmond Hale. The name hangs in the air for half a second. The primary officer does not immediately process it, but the backup officer's posture shifts slightly as that name sounds familiar. Commissioner, the primary officer repeats, skepticism evident. Yes. You mean like commissioner of the chief's office? Yes. The officer laughs again, louder this time. Man, come on. He turns to his partner. Did you hear that? But the backup officer is not laughing. He is studying the man more intently now. Do you have your credentials on you? He asks. Yes. The man slowly reaches inside his jacket again, a deliberate and visible movement. He removes a leather credential wallet and hands it over calmly. The backup officer opens it and reads. His eyes pause slightly longer than expected, then shift up to the man and then back down again. This is because what he is reading is not a security contractor clearance, but rather executive municipal authority, complete with a city seal, departmental insignia, and a formal appointment signature. The primary officer notices the pause. What? He asks. The backup officer does not answer immediately. Instead, he studies the credential one more time, then hands it back respectfully. It is a small gesture, but one laden with recognition. You might want to run that through dispatch, he says quietly. The primary officer frowns. Why? Just run it. The tone is now firm, professional, and leaves no room for refusal. The primary officer picks up their radio. They read off the credential ID, name, title, and agency code. They wait. Static fills the air, but instead of a casual dispatch chatter, the response comes back formal, structured, respectful, a unit requesting verification. Stand by. There is a pause, longer than would be typical for a license plate check, as high-level municipal credentials are processed through command databases, not patrol records. While waiting, the primary officer folds their arms again, still defensive, not yet recalibrated. They lean slightly toward their partner and mutter, Watch, it'll come back. I'm just an administrative assistant or something. The backup officer does not respond, as they are now observing the primary officer more than the suspect. Dispatch crackles back, clearer this time, confirming the identity. Commissioner D. Desmond Hale, recently appointed Chief of Police, effective command transfer scheduled for today. Silence slams onto the sidewalk, heavy, immediate. The primary officer blinks once. They have not processed it. They key the microphone again. Repeat. Dispatch responds, slower, more deliberate. Subject on scene is confirmed. Incoming Chief of Police. Command assumption meeting scheduled at municipal headquarters. The radio falls silent, but the ensuing silence is louder. The backup officers straighten instinctively, a subtle yet automatic reaction, because rank recognition does not necessitate an announcement, it requires confirmation, and confirmation has just arrived. The primary officer slowly lowers their radio. They look back at the man, their perspective now altered. They are re-evaluating everything that was said minutes earlier, every accusation, every assumption, every phrase captured on the body camera. "You're the new chief?" the officer asks. Commissioner Hale nods calmly. "Yes," he confirms without arrogance or a raised voice, simply stating a fact. Pedestrians are whispering more loudly now. Valet attendants are staring openly, their curiosity fully piqued because the narrative has flipped in mere seconds. The primary officer clears their throat slightly, attempting to regain their footing. "Well, you have to understand how this appeared." Hale tilts his head slightly. "How did it appear?" The officer gestures toward the Porsche again. "A luxury vehicle, high crime auto theft patterns, suspicious loitering." Hale nods once. "And what made it suspicious?" The officer hesitates. "Because the actual answer cannot be professionally articulated." "You said cars like this do not belong to my demographic," Hale says calmly. The officer does not answer, as the body camera has already preserved the statement. Denial would be futile. The backup officers remain silent, as the current issue is not vehicle theft, but rather officer conduct. Hale continues calmly. "You said I did not look like someone who owns a Porsche." Silence. "You detained me beside my own vehicle." Silence again. "You dismissed my credentials before verifying them." The officer exhales slowly, as every word is accurate, documented, and time-stamped. Dispatch crackles once more. "Command staff notified of arrival. Escort requested." That notification shifts the moment again, as now department leadership is aware that their incoming chief is present outside and that patrol officers are with him. The building doors open behind them. Two command staff officers emerge, dressed in formal uniforms with visible command insignia. They scan the sidewalk, then see Hale and immediately walk toward him with professional urgency, and the moment they reach him, they salute, not casually, but formally and publicly. "Chief Hale," one of them says, "apologies for the delay. The board is ready for you." The salute carries more weight than any dispatch confirmation because the hierarchy is now visibly apparent, not just audibly communicated. The primary officer steps back half a pace, their posture visibly shrinking as authority has just reversed in front of witnesses, and the realization settles in fully. The man he accused of stealing a Porsche now outranks his entire chain of command. The two command staff officers remain standing in front of Commissioner, now Chief Desmond Hale, their hands still at salute, their postures rigid, their respect unmistakable, and the contrast between their demeanor and the patrol officer's earlier posture is stark, visible, and documented. "At ease," Hale says calmly. They lower their hands. Immediately, one of them steps slightly forward. "We have been expecting you upstairs, Chief. The transition briefing is ready." Hale nods once, but he does not move yet, as the moment on the sidewalk is not yet concluded, neither administratively nor ethically. He turns slowly back toward the patrol officer. Not aggressively, not emotionally, but with measured intent. The officer avoids direct eye contact at first, their radio still in hand, but now silent, as the situation has fully reversed. "You approached me under the assumption that I had stolen my own vehicle," Hale states calmly. The officer swallows slightly. No response is given, as denial would directly contradict the body camera footage. You detained me beside property registered in my name. Silence. You disregarded valid registration. Silence again. You dismissed credentials prior to verification. The officer exhales quietly, as every statement is procedurally accurate and recorded. Pedestrians nearby are now whispering openly. Phones are still raised. Valley staff are watching, as the story has publicly, not privately, taken a dramatic turn. Hale continues. You said that vehicles like this do not belong to my demographic. The phrase hangs heavier, spoken back, than it did when first uttered, because replayed bias sounds different when directed towards accountability. The officer finally speaks. I was following suspicion indicators. Hale nods once. And what indicator identified theft? The officer hesitates. Vehicle class theft patterns. Which match what behavior? A pause. Loitering. I was waiting for a meeting. Hale replies calmly. The backup officers remain silent, as they are now witnessing a procedural review in real time. Hale steps slightly closer, not in a confrontational manner, but directly. Suspicion without articulation becomes profiling. The sentence lands as instructional, not emotional, employing training language and command terminology. The officer shifts their weight slightly. This is because it is not merely embarrassment, but evaluative exposure. One of the command staff officers speaks quietly. The body camera is active, sir. Hale nods once. I am aware, he states, which means every word he is currently saying is deliberate. You did not investigate a stolen vehicle. Hale continues calmly. A pause. You investigated whether I looked like someone who could own it. Silence blankets the sidewalk. This is because that distinction is the genuine issue, not the paperwork or the procedure, but perception. The patrol officer lowers their gaze slightly, as a rebuttal would require evidence and there is none. Dispatch crackles again. Chief's escort ready at the main entrance. The command staff officer gestures politely toward the building, but Hale does not move yet, not until the administrative moment is concluded. He looks once more at the patrol officer, not with hostility, but with measured authority. Authority is not demonstrated by escalation, he says. A pause. It is demonstrated by judgment. This is the same lesson tone used in internal training briefings, but delivered live and publicly. The officer nods faintly, as acknowledgement is the only professional response remaining. Hale adjusts his cuffs slightly, his suit settling back into place, then reaches for the Porsche door. But before entering, he pauses again. One final clarification. You ran my plates, he says calmly. Yes, sir. They returned to me. Yes, sir. And you still detained me? The officer does not answer, as the answer would confirm procedural failure. Hale nods once, not in anger, but with finality, as the lesson has already been effectively conveyed. He turns toward the command staff officer. Let us not keep the board waiting. They nod and step aside respectfully. Valet attendants instinctively straighten as he passes. Pedestrians part slightly. Phones are still recording. The patrol officers remain on the curb, quieter now, as the stop did not end in an arrest, it ended in exposure. Hale enters the building, the glass doors closing behind him. Reflections of patrol lights flicker across the surface as they shut, and on the sidewalk, the power dynamic lingers, because everyone present understands one thing now. The man accused of stealing a Porsche has just walked inside to assume command of the very department that accused him. The body camera continues to record the patrol officer standing silently beside the SUV they believed was stolen. And that footage will travel far beyond this curb into supervisory review, command evaluation, and conduct assessment, because once bias is documented on body camera, it ceases to be an opinion and becomes evidence. If you are enjoying this documentary so far, please like and subscribe, because what follows is not merely awkward silence. It involves internal review, badge accountability, and a chief of police deciding the fate of the officer who profiled him on his first day in command. The body camera footage continues to roll, even after Chief Desmond Hale disappears through the glass doors of headquarters. The patrol officer remains standing on the sidewalk, still silent. The black Porsche SUV sits exactly where it was, gleaming under the midday sun, untouched and undisputed, registered to the man who just walked inside to assume command over the entire department. The encounter, however, had not concluded. The body camera's gaze lingered, capturing the moments that followed. It was within this post-confrontation period that the seeds of repercussions began to sprout. One of the responding officers let out a slow, quiet exhalation, just loud enough to be registered by the audio recording without amplifying the awkwardness. "Remarkable," he murmured under his breath, not in judgment, but in simple acknowledgement of the recent events. Another officer offered a subtle shake of his head, a silent testament to the shared understanding among those present regarding the gravity of the unfolding situation, the proximity of a weapon during a non-criminal interaction, a stance of detainment without apparent justification, and the documented use of biased language. All these were not mere procedural ambiguities. These were definitive red flags demanding scrutiny. The supervising sergeant, alerted by the dispatch's escalation and the subsequent notification of senior leadership, arrived shortly thereafter. He emerged with a composed demeanor, his posture controlled, a digital recorder already active in his hand. Such supervisor arrivals following command-level involvement invariably signaled a formal documentation process. He approached the assembled officers deliberately, inquiring, "What transpired?" His tone was procedural, devoid of accusation. The primary officer responded first, his voice now considerably softer than before. "Contact initiated due to a suspicious vehicle," he stated. The sergeant offered a single nod. "The outcome?" The officer paused for a fraction of a second. "The vehicle is registered to Chief Hale." A brief silence followed. Chief Hale. The sergeant momentarily ceased his recording, his gaze lingering longer than usual. Hearing the information, secondhand conveyed a different weight than receiving it directly over dispatch. "You activated his vehicle?" the sergeant queried. "No weapon was brandished," the officer replied swiftly. While technically accurate, the proximity of the hand to the weapon, the tone of voice, and the verbal escalation remained points subject to review. The sergeant resumed his recording, adding, "Were credentials confirmed before or after the detainment posture?" After a brief pause for another entry, one of the backup officers interjected quietly. Command staff witnessed the final interaction of significance. The presence of supervisory observation coupled with a high-ranking officer's involvement automatically elevated the review's classification. The sergeant calmly closed his recorder. "The body camera footage will be flagged for an audit," he announced. His words were couched in procedural language, not punitive, yet the implication was clear. This would trigger a comprehensive review encompassing the use of force, an analysis of conduct, an assessment of biased language, and an evaluation of command exposure. The patrol officer simply nodded, recognizing the futility of any argument. Body cameras were impartial chroniclers of tone, phrasing, and sequence. Across the street, onlookers began to disperse gradually, lowering their phones, their conversations spreading. Public perception, it was understood, could form far more rapidly than any internal investigation. And today, the narrative was not being shaped by hearsay, it was being molded by captured footage. Within the precinct, Chief Hale proceeded with members of his command staff towards the executive conference level, maintaining a deliberate, unhurried pace, a demonstration of his composed leadership. One of the deputy chiefs spoke softly as they walked. "Sir, we were informed of the contact." Hale acknowledged with a nod. "I presumed as much. We will commence a review." Hale briefly halted his movement, turning slightly. His expression was not one of anger, but of measured consideration. "Ensure the process is strictly procedural," he advised calmly, pausing before adding, "and not personal." The deputy nodded. "Yes, Chief." Chief Hale understood a fundamental principle. Accountability carried greater weight when it was institutional rather than emotionally driven. Back outside, the patrol officers began to clear the scene, but the atmosphere had shifted, becoming quieter, more contemplative. Embarrassment might fade, but recorded actions persisted. One of the backup officers spoke to the primary officer as they returned to their respective vehicles. "You need to verify before you start narrating, man." It wasn't an accusation, but a piece of seasoned advice offered man to man. The primary officer gave a faint nod. "I know." And he did. Hours later, administrative flags were already being logged for the body camera footage, given the involvement of command personnel. Publicly discriminatory language and an escalated detainment posture had automatically initiated an administrative evaluation, a mandatory process, not optional. Days elapsed as the footage underwent frame-by-frame scrutiny, and the audio was meticulously transcribed. Training officers were present during the analysis, recognizing that such incidents served not only as disciplinary moments, but as crucial instructional opportunities. The findings were compiled into a structured report noting policy violations, a failure to articulate reasonable suspicion, escalation without observable behavioral indicators, and the use of profiling language inconsistent with conduct policy. The dismissal of credentials prior to verification was also documented. The disciplinary outcomes followed departmental guidelines. A formal written reprimand, mandatory bias recognition training, and a review of probationary conduct in the field, including a temporary reassignment from proactive patrol duties. While not career-ending, it was a career-defining event, as documented exposure to bias permanently influenced promotion pathways. Weeks later, Chief Hale delivered his first department-wide briefing. Standing at the podium in the auditorium, his uniform immaculate and his command insignia now official, he made no mention of the specific officer, the Porsche, or the sidewalk encounter. Instead, he addressed the underlying principle. "Authority," he stated calmly, "is not demonstrated by whom you stop. It is proven by how you stop them." A profound silence settled over the room. As many officers had already viewed the footage during training circulation, he continued, "Verification before escalation safeguards citizens, and it protects you." The lesson resonated more deeply than any punishment could, reframing procedure as a shield rather than a restriction. Life continued. Patrol shifts proceeded, calls continued to arrive, and stops still occurred. However, a subtle but significant departmental shift quietly followed the incident. A new training module was introduced focusing on ownership perception, bias recognition, and the protocols for interacting with high-value assets. While the footage was anonymized, the scenarios were unmistakable, as real incidents provided more impactful lessons than hypothetical ones. Months later, the same patrol officer was observed at a community outreach event, engaging with individuals in a calmer, more measured manner, prioritizing verification and slower interactions. His experience, particularly his documented experience, had reshaped his instincts. Meanwhile, across the city, Chief Hale continued his command operations, overseeing policy reviews, community engagement initiatives, and departmental restructuring. The Porsche remained parked outside headquarters on some mornings, still gleaming, still his. Yet now, no one questioned his ownership as he exited the vehicle because the story had extended far beyond the curb. It had journeyed through training rooms, command briefings, policy updates, shifts in officer mindset, and the impartial record of body cameras. It preserved everything, not solely for the purpose of punishment, but for institutional growth. Because once bias is recorded, it can be addressed, and once addressed, it can fundamentally alter how authority is exercised moving forward. The end. See